Good evening and welcome, alumni and friends of the arts, to the Spring 2013 Distinguished Speakers Series of the University of Chicago. I'm Chris Scheffler, your host this evening, and you've all probably also met Barbara Stevens Strauss, your co-host, who is an artist in her own right. As a graduate of the college, I know firsthand the intellectual rigor imposed on undergraduates at Chicago, while fresh, creative approaches to each subject are actively encouraged. Careful looking and original thinking, if you will. So too, our distinguished speaker this evening, Peter Selz, AM'49, PhD 1954, began to make his mark on art history with his dissertation, which became a revelatory first book in 1957 titled German Expressionist Painting. In the book, he explores the relationship of abstraction to the emotional qualities of expressionist art. Art historians, from Burckhardt to Herschel Chip, Robert Hughes, and Sister Wendy, usually live apart from the bohemian lives of their subjects and honor traditional scholarship with their acuity of insight. Not so for our speaker this evening. Placing art in its historical and its social and political context seems de rigueur nowadays, but it was not so in the 50s. Growing up in pre-World War II Munich, his art dealer grandfather introduced Peter to art. Living with relatives in mid-30s New York City, he learned that one member of the family was already in the art business, and that nothing's ever become of cousin Alfred. Alfred Stieglitz is who they were talking about. Tonight, we'll hear how our guest taught and curated his way to the publication in 2006, The Art of Engagement, Visual Politics in California and Beyond. Just as a curator selects or edits the artworks on display to shape and guide our understanding of a theme or an artist, so does a good biographer. Peter's interlocutor will be art historian and longtime friend Paul Karlstrom, the author of Peter Selz, Sketches of a Life in Art. Shortly after publication, the University of California Press put it on its bestseller list. Dr. Karlstrom is well known as an oral historian, useful during his 30 years as West Coast Regional Director of the Smithsonian's Archives of American Art, and for Mr. Selz's biography. Paul conducted over 45 interviews with Peter and important people in his life, including many artists, as the basis for the biography. In addition, Paul is author of or editor of several books on American art, chief among them On the Edge of America, California Modernist Art, 1900 to 1950, and the groundbreaking Asian American Art, A History, 1850 to 1970. Paul has degrees from Stanford and UCLA. Peter and Paul will answer questions after the conversation and then sign copies of their books. Please join me in welcoming Paul Karlstrom in conversation with the University of Chicago's distinguished graduate, Peter Selz.
Boy, what an introduction that was. It's pretty intimidating. You know, I did not go to the University of Chicago. I'm sure I couldn't have gotten in. Somehow, I had to settle for the West Coast schools, but it worked. But really, I'm honored to be here talking to you. And this is my first time in the Mechanics Institute. which I should be embarrassed to say. I mean, I walked by it going to the dentist, from the Montgomery Street station many times. So here I am, it's an honor, and in some ways, my subject, although we're very close personal friends, is an intimidating one because his accomplishments, as Christine read, are legion. But beyond that, what makes it particularly fun to be biographer of Selz is the eccentricities, as she says, there's the average academic approach, and then there's Peter Selz. And that's absolutely true. And so I'm not going to concentrate on it, but what I want you to think about as we're talking is what distinguishes Selz among his colleagues. There are many other art historians who are famous. A number went to the University of Chicago, but they don't stand out particularly. Selz definitely stands out. He's Mr. Modernism, but beyond that, he lives the art life. And that's kind of the theme that I try to bring into these questions. By the way, the book's based on oral history, as Chris mentioned. And there's advantage to that, of course, is that you have your subject, your living subject, available, accessible to you. But there are also problems, inevitable ones in such a situation. If that subject is a good friend and you want to keep your friendship, because there's no biography that's worth anything that doesn't have, a little bit of the dark side. I think we hit the right balance with this, and Peter, he was mad at me a few times along the way, but in sum, I think he feels okay. Yeah. I get my pat. So what distinguishes Selz? And we'll try to explore that. And what is his real legacy? German Expressionism, of course, is a big part. I'm going to read, and I promise you, very little from this book. Oh, here it is. And I think it kind of sets the stage for our discussion. This is from the preface. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. More than a quarter of a century after Peter Selz resigned as director of the University Art Museum in Berkeley, California, and returned to the classroom, he found himself 400 miles south, seated at a table at L'Angolo Cafe in Los Angeles. His dinner companion asked him if he would like to go watch one of his former undergraduates' lecture class. Students paint on a large plastic canvas while a rock band played. Peter enthusiastically responded, "Let's go." That's the way I remember it. Shortly thereafter, he walked through the door of the Whiskey A Go-Go on Sunset Boulevard into a wall of highly amplified sound. Norton Wisdom, covered with paint, was furiously creating spontaneous imagery, pausing only briefly to transform shapes and marks, erasing here and adding there in an ever-changing, direct pictorial response to the music. The year was 1999, and this was the pickup supergroup Banyan, composed of some of the top improvisational jazz rock fusion musicians of the 1980s and 90s. On its first tour, Wisdom was already becoming known as the artist for his work with varied bands and highly regarded solo musicians. Selz had no idea that Norton, sponge and squeegee in hand, was working closely with some of the most respected and admired artists in contemporary music, among them guitarist, composer Nils Klein, along with jazz rock violinist Lily Hayden, nor did he remember, or did he even remember, wisdom from the large lecture classes in which he held forth on modern art to thousands of Berkeley undergraduates. Furthermore, he would not have gone to the Whiskey, a club he had never heard of, on his own. But when offered the opportunity, he took it, always ready for fresh experiences. Peter was and remains ever open to the new and the untried, both in life and in art. The fact is that as a teacher, Selz inspired many of his students in ways that affected the choices they made. By his example and enthusiasm, he demonstrated how to live life fully in intimate relation to art and in opposition to establishment restrictions. Not all professors, by the way, like that. That was even more than the information he conveyed, his great and rare achievement as a teacher, and it is the quality that many of his students, graduate and undergraduate, best remember and most value. It goes on, of course, that's just the beginning of the book. What I'm going to do with Peter, I've mentioned already that oral history, this book is based on oral history, and that means it's full of a lot of quotes, and it's an extremely interesting way to proceed, and it's very difficult. I thought when I went in, it would be easy. So I was supposed to say just a few words about the making of the book, and that's probably pretty much enough. But what I want you to remember is through this process, the author and subject become bonded collaborators in telling a life story. That's all it is. Each one with shared, but also slightly different goals. And biography itself is an amazing process, because where's the truth? And so, we end up compromising, I guess, right? Our intention this evening is to recreate as much as we can some of the open and even rambling feeling of the non-journalistic interview process. I don't know if I mentioned this, I usually don't resort to prepared questions. People can't believe this. And in my interviews, I just sit down, and if it's about California art, I don't need prepared questions, or I think I don't. But at any rate, our time is limited. So, Peter,
yes,
they're waiting eagerly. We're here with a group of your fellow alumni from the University of Chicago. So clearly that needs to be a main topic.
yeah.
And the people want to hear, I'm sure, the role it played in you launching your career. So, number one, why did you go there?
Why did I go to the University of Chicago? Well, I had just come out of had lost 70 years between high school and my first year at the University of Chicago. I had to work in a brewery in New York to support my parents, and then I had to be in the Army, mostly in the Office of Strategic Services, for another 3 years. And then there was a GI Bill, and I could have gone anywhere in the country. And why did I decide on Chicago? Well, about a week ago, I read in the New York Times a suggestion to parents and high school students that they might select the college they want to go to by trying to check out the money that their graduates make. There could be a list, and you can find out what their salaries are after graduation from college. Well, this would, of course, rule out college professors like myself. Anyhow, this was hardly the reason to go to college, to go to the University of Chicago. When I was at the University of Chicago, I remember they had a leaflet sent out about Chicago. It said, if you want to go to college where you can enjoy belonging to fraternities or sororities, Chicago is not your place. If you want to go, if you're interested in sports, in football or basketball or whatever it may be, the University of Chicago is not your choice. If you're interested in climate, you certainly don't want to be in Chicago. But it said in big letters, if you want an education, then you go to Chicago. These days, the whole idea of getting a college education in order to earn money and get a good job, this was not at all in the forefront of our ideas. Our idea of an education, the purpose, and I still believe that very strongly, and I taught that way to my students also, the purpose of education is education. And that idea that you are an educated human being was what the University of Chicago provided. Instead of the kind of cafeteria kind of universities like the place I was on the faculty of for the last 40 years, where anybody can choose, I take this and I take that and I take that, was not Hudson's idea. The idea was to have an education in the social sciences, physical sciences, biological sciences, and the humanities of a full, rounded, educated person, so that a physicist would know about music and a musician would know about physics. This kind of education was almost, some of it was also at Columbia, but was almost unique to the University of Chicago. And I still very strongly believe that this is the kind of education that is best for people. And I'm very happy to say that this is the kind of education from which I profited at U of C.
So you didn't enter as a graduate student, but you entered the graduate program. Is that right?
What was possible at that time was you could skip the BA. You could go, they had all kinds of things for GIs coming back, and you could go straight for an MA. You didn't have to bother with an MA. You could go straight from MA, and in my case, to a PhD. I never got a BA.
That's a very good point. And my wife shocks people by telling friends who ask, our daughter went to Princeton, and my wife said to her, this is not job training, this is an education.
Yeah.
And so it's sort of hard though to deal with that as a reality, but we can set that aside.
It's so true when you talk to people about whatever it is, politics, whatever it may be, you know whether they have an educated mind and whether they're willing to ask questions and disagree and bring up ideas.
So our leader here, Christine, wanted me to ask you what you loved most about your time at the University of Chicago, besides wonderful education.
Well, I had some very, very, very good teachers. I think my most important teacher happened to be an economist, but a man who spread out from economics to the tremendous widespread ideas. His name was John U. Neff, has become very famous, and he started the Committee on Social Thought. And he was an enormously inspiring teacher. And then I had great teachers in art history. Ulrich Mitteldorf, who also had come from Germany, a major Renaissance scholar, and then Joshua Taylor in modern art, and then went on to the Smithsonian. These were marvelous teachers, but I think the most important thing was an education in which the idea was that you don't accept, no matter how good these people were, you don't accept authority. You question and you ask and you delve into ideas. And I think that was very important. Also, I studied biology. I studied all kinds of things which I hadn't studied before. And it was a terrific program.
So was that all you did, study there? Didn't you have a social life? You did find a wife there, you know.
I found my first wife there. She had just graduated from Oberlin, and she came to Chicago to get her MA in literature, and then she became a very accomplished writer. So we had the social life. We didn't have all that much time for social life, but we managed all right. And it was a very, very good social life and interaction with my fellow students. And it was a very good situation.
So, Peter, I think, as your biographer, one of the main threads, themes in your story is basically an American immigration story, starting in Munich, German Jew, managing the third of three brothers who did. He was the youngest, got out in 1936, by himself, no English, came to New York. Luckily there was a family there who took care of him. Unluckily, they were head of a brewery, Rheingold, and this must have been the worst part of the whole experience.
Very bad.
I don't know if you'll remember to say this, but I've just been rereading the book a little bit, and you actually said that at the Rheingold Brewery, you experienced more anti-Semitism than you ever did in Munich. Is that really true?
But yeah, this is actually quite true. This brewery was owned by Jewish families, but the people working there were German people of German extraction, and big, heavy, little Jew boy. They were these big, strong guys, and they were all German. I came from German families, and they belonged. Some of them were called the German American Bund in Yorkville, and they were Nazis. And this was the beginning of the war, and every time there was another Nazi victory in Europe, they celebrated. It happened very frequently, and there was, there I was with all these big, hefty German brewers, and I belonged to the Brewers Union after a while, and their meetings in Brooklyn were held in German. It was a pretty crummy situation.
They weighed a lot more than you did.
Yeah, they sure as hell did.
The actual pounds are mentioned in the book, if you want to check on that. I wonder, for me, when I was writing this book, with Peter's help, getting all that information, interviews and so forth, I became stuck on the first chapter, which was the Munich period, because it opened up a world that I had no way of really knowing. And I feel that I could have written a book just about that, had to finally move on. But you did come to this country without English, as we mentioned, and alone, and you had some sort of a structure, a place to live and so forth. But my impression is what really saved the day for you was the German Jewish youth group based on the brown shirts, but not them.
Hardly.
Well, can you tell us a little bit? A lot of people don't know about this.
Well, this really, this has nothing to do with the University of Chicago.
Are you interested in hearing about it?
Yes.
Well, it was a youth group of left-wing socialist Zionists, which was still possible in those days. And we all wanted to go to Palestine and started a kibbutz there, which these people did. And this was very, very important to me, this group of people. We decided to start a socialist Zionist each situation in Palestine totally different from what it has become. And it was we went on hikes, we went on excursions, but we also read a great deal. And we read Marx, we read Rilke, we read Freud, and Hermann Hesse, and it was a combination of intellectual ideas and physical situation, going on hikes and weekends and in summertime and stuff like that, and getting ready to work in the kibbutz in Palestine.
And you didn't want to go to the United States?
I did not want to go to the United States. I wanted to go with my friends to Palestine. But my father, even back then, said you can't go there because there are Arabs there, and there's going to be great difficulties. He was a very intelligent man, and he realized that this could be a situation.
I suppose you don't want to say anything about, well, not individuals so much, but in New York, how it was reassembled, this Werkleute group.
No, that's not all that. Let's go on.
Get the book.
Yeah.
It's really interesting.
It's all in the book.
It's all in the book. Well, all of this is in the book. Moving on, another question I had for you was your, military service, and that's a whole little part, and it's pretty interesting, and there's some funny stories, but we're not going to.
Oh yeah, read the book about that, and boxing and everything else.
Yeah. He beat up a bully. First time with gloves on, and the pictures. Anyway, and so, but still. What was the greatest benefit, and this is important, of your military service?
Well, there was very, very, very little benefit. I was in the military, I was in the infantry, but then I was in the OSS in a very minor capacity, basically. And then there was I've had no great benefit from military service, except that I learned to hate the army.
You're forgetting about the GI Bill.
Oh well,
Chicago, the GI Bill.
Yeah, well, the GI Bill. The GI Bill. That was a wonderful thing. I would never have had an education if it hadn't been for the GI Bill. There was no way that as an immigrant I could have, although universities were still free, but you had to earn a living. There was no way I could have had an education without the GI Bill. Yeah, that's very important.
Good. I'm glad we got to that. You then, and we don't have time to go into the Institute of Design, the new Bauhaus, but that played an important part in your career. And you want to say anything about that?
Well, I was in Chicago, and I was still working my PhD at the university, and then I got a part-time job and then a full-time job at the Institute of Design, which was the new Bauhaus. Moholy-Nagy, after he left the Bauhaus, but the Nazis closed the Bauhaus, went to England for a short time, and then started the new Bauhaus in Chicago. And it was a wonderful place. And I was very, very fortunate. My first teaching job was in this truly avant-garde kind of art school in which, based on Bauhaus principles, in which practical art, like practical design or architecture, was related to intellectual pursuits. And it was a very exciting place. And I taught there for about 8 years, and I was pretty lucky to have stopped.
Were you the first art historian?
No, there were other part-time art historians there. But it was only a part-time job because they didn't have a full-time art historian there.
So from there...
And then I got a really nice job after I had my PhD. My first job was to be first real job was to be chair of the art department at Pomona College. And I was there for 3 years, and it was and still is a great school, a liberal arts college. Again, not the kind of a cafeteria kind of place, but again, the kind of place where you got a general education and teach art, where art was part of their program, as was music. And it was a very, very, very good institution, and I really enjoyed teaching there. And my dissertation, then I began to convert the dissertation after it was accepted by the University of California Press into a book.
So
this got me started in this world.
That's for sure.
That's right.
Mr. Modernism, Mr. German Expressionism. So this was a first trip to California, which of course is relevant to us here, naturally. And the first sojourn was brief, like what, 3 years?
3 years.
Yeah. And yet a lot happened. And my point, it's my observation, is that Peter has a remarkable ability to adapt to wherever he is and sniff around and find out what's happening. And my question, it still interests me, and this is just strictly that brief period before you went to MoMA, but how did you manage to discover these artists in Southern California and in Northern California who were, for the most part, ignored in New York?
Well, I was always looking what was around me. And what was around me was very, very exciting in Southern California. I didn't know much about Northern California until later on. But in Southern California, I became extremely interested in the work of Rico Lebrun, which eventually ended up in Rico Lebrun being able to make a large mural in the same building in which the Jose Clemente Orozco mural is, at Ferrari Hall at Pomona. So and at the same time, it was Lebrun, but it's kind of new figuration, as we call it. At the same time, I found that there were some wonderful, totally abstract painters around, like Carl Benjamin, who was a neighbor of mine in Claremont, and Fred Hammersley, who was on my faculty, and especially John McLaughlin, whom I began to, when I first saw his totally abstract work, I was enormously taken by it. But you have to realize, I first got really interested in abstraction when I worked on my German Expressionist book, which, the culmination of German Expressionism, as you will find when you read this book, was Kandinsky. That in a way, I felt that the whole Expressionist movement, in a way, beginning to more and less abstract with people like Kirchner and Beckmann, led to the kind of total abstraction of Kandinsky. So having been interested in Kandinsky, and then later on when I was on Fulbright in Paris, I spent a good deal of time with Kandinsky's widow, another pleasant person, but still. So I was prepared, on the one hand, to look at the kind of figuration of Rico Lebrun and the kind of beautiful abstraction as McLaughlin. And I think you've been talking about it at that time in New York, for instance, you had everybody took sides for abstraction or figuration. And I felt taking this kind of sides makes no sense at all. That what you look for is good art, which I can define later on, as against not good art.
Good. That takes care of a couple of my questions.
All right.
in less time than I would have taken asking them.
All right. Have you asked them all before?
There's a Peter Selz vision of art, and particularly of modern art. And I think maybe that is beginning to emerge a little bit, and it's not for me to comment on it. I have very definite ideas about what that is and why it's so important and unusual. In 2006, your book, Art of Engagement, Visual Politics in California and Beyond, was published again by UC Press. It's like bookends, you know, through UC Press.
Yeah.
And you are identified with social conscience and requiring that, not in all art, but that's what you do look for. So it has to do, I think, for you in how to identify significant art, and that it has the human presence, and that can be then all of the issues that affect us. Do you want to say something about that?
Well, I think this is important. I think it has the human presence, and it has a purpose. And I want to do I've always been interested in politics ever since I lived in Nazi Germany. How could I not be interested in politics with the brown shirts walking down in front of our house every 3 or 4 days? So I became interested in politics from very, very early on. By the time I became aware of things, when I was about 20, 25 years old, I knew that I was a socialist. And in a way, I've looked at art and life from the point of view of a socialist. And as a socialist, I wanted to write a book on political art.
That's it.
And it turned out to be a very, very good book. And I'm about to give a lecture. It happens to be coming up in Texas, of all places. Oh, here we go. Yes, wonderful. Okay.
We've gone 45 minutes?
You have 10 minutes.
Oh,
All right.
okay. There are a few more each.
One more thing. And this lecture is going to be called, my political art was called The Art of Engagement. This lecture, which I may give again later on here, is called Engagement and Commitment. By that I meant engagement would be an art that's politically engaged, but commitment is to the work of art. And the great political artist is an artist who makes great art. So the commitment is more important than political engagement art. The commitment is to creating a work of art. Whatever that means.
That's a murky territory to go into for sure. I was going to ask about memorable exhibitions. I mean, Peter has had a very long career, and it wasn't easy getting it all into a biography, and it's even much harder to try to do it right now. But there are certain things that you're really identified with that I think then represent bigger issues. And a very famous exhibition was at MoMA in '59, New Images of Man. And can you say something about that?
Well, at that point, the 1959 abstract expression was king in New York. But I thought that's not the only thing that's going on in the art world. Much as I liked abstract expressionism, and soon after that I did a major retrospective of Mark Rothko. But I realized that there was the whole existentialist time, there was other important work being done, art which related to human experience. And but you see, in New York, everybody was only looking at what's going on in New York. So in this show, I had New York artists, like most important of all, de Kooning's picture of women, or the late Pollock's. But I also realized there was a lot of art going on outside of New York. There was Dubuffet and there was Giacometti working in Paris. There was Palazzi and others working in London. There was in the American hinterland, they complained about, I was showing that, people like Leon Gallup painting in Chicago, Enrico Lebrun in Los Angeles. They didn't like that I brought all these people from outside of New York and figurative painting. But right now, you go to the Tate Gallery, and there's a sign, "No images of man," is my name under it, and that's where they show the Dubuffets and Giacomettis and Francis Bacon's. So it's really materialized into an important show. But it was very controversial in New York, because at that point, everybody was only looking at New York painting. And here I came from California and was showing things which were not New York painting. Although New York painters were very much part of it.
So you had only 5-6 years at MoMA?
7.
7?
7, yeah.
No, I got that wrong. Not in the book. 7. And then you left MoMA with the next big ascending movement being pop art. Peter, I'm not going to ask him what he thought of it. I mean, there's a whole story here. He did not like pop art very much, and still doesn't, but he admits there are some good things about it. New York was changing big time, and this is a little bit of social history that gets into Peter's biography. That's, as you say, you were at the right place, or
at the right time.
At the right time.
I made it the right place.
You made it. Anyway, so Peter came here in 65 to the Bay Area as founding director of the then called University Art Museum, and they were building a new. He made many exhibitions. I mean, he really had a big impact upon the culture, visual arts culture of the Bay Area. Huge. It was like a big shot coming in. Yeah, that's true. Anyway, so that's...
You weren't even here then. You were still at Stanford.
Yeah. No, I just graduated. Okay, anyway. Right, this is not first-hand information. I met you in 73.
Yeah.
Not a lot after that. So anyway, Peter is almost 94. His birthday is March 27th. Yeah. He retired from teaching at Cal in 1988.
Something like that.
But in fact, your activities were really undiminished, and it's extraordinary. He writes and organizes exhibitions more productively and at a higher level than almost any of his younger colleagues, especially this one. And we just say, how can this be? How can this be? He has projects planned for the future. He doesn't stop. And I want you just to mention quickly, because it ties in with the politics, Chagoya.
Yeah, I'm working on Enrique Chagoya's show now, which will be in a very nice place in Berkeley called the Color Art Institute, which has a wonderful exhibition space. And Chagoya is one of these artists who manages to combine political awareness with a superb craftsmanship and understanding for art, whether he does codices or large painting drawings those are the two major things, and also prints. And an artist who had this wonderful combination, really a major artist, who had this wonderful combination of the two. I'm also working on a show which is going to be at the Meridian Gallery near here of an artist named Yisrael Feltzat, who does very raw, wonderful, total art painting, which are totally different from what you normally see. He's also practicing shaman, and much of that mystery and magic will be in his work. The Sequoia show will be in the spring at Kala, and the Sequoia show in the summer at Meridian. And then next year, I'm going to do another Bill Wiley show.
I almost rest my case. Peter, you're famous for appearing at exhibition receptions pretty much on a regular basis. If you go to one, and it's an important one at least, Selz will probably be there. He enjoys hanging out with his art world friends. He participates on panels and gives these and subjects himself to interrogations by his biographer, this kind of thing. Frankly, we're all amazed by your seemingly inexhaustible energy. Although Carol, who is here, Mrs. Selz, tells me recently he's slowing down a bit. Well, there it is. My final question for you is the one that I'm not, well, I think I know what your answer might be, but it's this. What's the secret? What's your secret? And where's the resource, the source for keeping so engaged, committed and engaged?
Well, I suppose having good genes.
You mean Levi's?
Yeah, I don't know. It keeps me going. I'm very, very lucky. I'm an old man, a nonagenarian. I never thought I'd achieve that. And I've always had a lot of energy. I think that all the things I managed to do, did different things at the same time. When I first came here, I was director of the Berkeley Art Museum. I was curator of most of my shows, and I was a professor teaching graduate, undergraduate courses in the History of Art department. And then I had a lot of energy, and some of the energy still prevails. Thank you.
It sure does. So, that's it. A positive note.
We have about a half hour for questions and book signing. So I'm sorry, but I get privileges. I'd like to be the first to ask you if you would, after you answer questions, please autograph my book.
I will be happy.
Thank
You
you.
both will autograph.
Do you want a personal message, or is it just the name okay?
Oh, I would like to have something a little bit more. Make you work for this. Okay, questions?
Back to Chicago, Peter, you indicated that when you were a student, the students were encouraged to challenge the professors.
Yeah.
And I'm curious if you could tell us a couple of your challenges that you might have made that you still remember.
Oh my goodness, and I'm sorry to have to tell you that that's so long ago.
Too long.
But it was an atmosphere where disagreement was encouraged. But I certainly cannot remember any particular instance.
How tactful a response.
Yes.
Bonnie.
MOOCs, M-O-O-C, massively, whatever those things are. Technology is coming into higher education in massive ways. And I'm wondering how you see that kind of thing maybe playing out, where face-to-face within a group is still so important in terms of discussion and learning.
Well, I had to answer Muldoon's question by not remembering, and this is the opposite. I have to answer this by not knowing enough about what's going on. With all the, with all the new electronic things, and which I think are extremely important. I mean, this is where we are going. But I have no personal experience and knowledge about them. But I mean, this is where it's going. but it's beyond my ken, really.
Hi, so you said that good art is socially or politically engaged and committed. Do you feel that art historians have a responsibility to also be socially or politically responsible and engaged?
To art historians, that's a very, very good question. Do art historians have the responsibility to politically engage? The answer to that is most of art historians do not. However, art history in this country did hardly exist until all these triple exiles came to America. In the major universities and colleges throughout the country, there were about 25 noted, most of them older than myself, noted art historians who really established the art history as a discipline in America. In California, Northern California here, it was mostly Walter Horn. They may not have been politically engaged, but politics certainly caught up with them. And many art historians are politically engaged, and okay, let me say a little more about them. For a long, long time, art was looked at in a totally formalist way. Clement Greenberg is a typical example of art critics who looked at art only in a formalist way, and you didn't have to pay any attention to the political, social, or personal background of the artist. This has changed. This has changed very much, and I was one of the people who I think changed it early on in my own work. So art history has become much more aware now of the social, political background in which the art, and personal background in which the artist produced. In my teaching, for instance, in Clement Greenberg type of writing, the person who makes the personal life of the artist has no place. The fact that I could tell my students in my classes my personal knowledge, personal involvement when I did this big show with an artist like Mark Roscoe, that meant a great deal to the students. So this personal thing is very important, and it's become more and more so.
Oh my God, Howard.
You mentioned that you were a socialist and very political. How did the McCarthy era affect your work?
Well, I was very, very fortunate that it was in Chicago. I didn't have to. It was not like at the University of California where I had to speak. They would be fired unless you said we're not a member of the Communist Party. The McCarthy era was very, very important. As soon, the first thing I did when all this happened was to renew my passport. I was ready to, if things would be as bad as they had been in Germany, my wife and I had a new passport, ready to leave again. So I was very, very much involved, very much aware of the McCarthy situation, although I was not personally affected by it.
Your question.
As a physicist with some interest in music who came to the Bay Area in the early 60s, I would like to ask you about three artists. One, Joseph Albers, for whom my aunt, a leading Bay Area landscape architect later in her career, studied. Second, Richard Diebenkorn, whose daughter co-starred with me in the Stanford Opera. And third, Lawrence Halprin, whose influence at Sea Ranch and elsewhere in the Bay Area, should we say, aroused my interest.
Well, I'm very glad you asked these questions. As far as Joseph Albers is concerned, he was again, like McLaughlin, one of the abstract artists whom I admired enormously. And of course, I got to know Albers because when I was teaching Institute of Design that Mahoney started, Albers was at Black Mountain and then at Yale, and we had very frequent contact. And he was an artist. I never got to know him well, but he was an artist whom I thought very highly of. Your second question about Richard Diebenkorn. Well, the first show that Paul mentioned, the New Images of Man show, included 3 California artists. I already mentioned the Brun. The other 2 were Diebenkorn and Diebenkorn, and I showed this figurative painting in the show, and Diebenkorn was again an artist whom I admired, especially now. I mean, the figurative work were in that first show. The early Berkeley and Albuquerque paintings, I think, are just absolutely wonderful, and so are the latest Ocean Park. And as far as Lawrence Alpern is concerned, well, I got to know Alpern, I got to know his wife, and Anna Halpern, and I'd quickly tell the story. Anna Halpern asked me when we had the beautiful new building at Berkeley, whether she could have her students, dancers, move through the building, all these ramps, and you find the space. And I thought that's a great idea. A week before that happened, the person in my staff said, "Do you know, Peter, they're going to be naked?" And I said, "No, I didn't know that." And she said, "Well, you better stop that because you're going to have trouble before we even started." So I said, "Well, if I had censored anything, I'd have troubles myself before I even start." And they danced naked. And it was a beautiful event. And last month, they redid it, and they did it, I think, even better than before, because they're now moving out of the building. And also, I met at Lawrence Halpern's worked very enormously, his fountain and everything else. Anna Halpern was very happy to redo her dance with the new generation of young dancers. Thank you. It was a very good, 3 people I was very happy to talk about.
Thank you.
Thank you. Norm?
Talking about the relationship of art to society, are you familiar with the new book by Eric Kandel, the neurosurgeon, the psychiatrist who won physiology, Nobel Prize in neurophysiology, actually. His book was looking at the Enlightenment period of Vienna around the turn of the 19th century, where Freud came up at the same time as the Viennese artists led by Klimt, and also the literary people, where the art people basically were ahead of Freud in describing the same thing. Are you all familiar with that?
Well, the first 10 years of the century, Vienna was really the intellectual center of the world. Paris had been, as Benjamin said, the capital of the 19th century, but then the next 10 years was Vienna. In psychology, in architecture, modern architecture had its roots there. In painting, as you mentioned, in philosophy, certainly in music, it was from Mahler to Schoenberg. I mean, this was an amazing situation in Vienna, and I mean, there was Klimt, more important and much better painter than Klimt actually, was Kokoschka, and there was Schiele. In music, we talked about that. I mean, it was an amazing outburst of intellectual energy that happened in Vienna with all the immigration from the whole Habsburg, from the huge Habsburg Empire coming to Vienna, many of them Jews. And after World War I, it was over. And you go to Vienna now, and it's a nice place to be. Mm-hmm. But at that point, it was this outburst. And the best book is called Vienna fin de siècle. Was written by Karl Schorsky, a former colleague of mine at Berkeley.
So it was a good soup for Freud and his friends to operate in. It was a good area for them to operate in.
Yeah, and look, I mean, Schnitzler, you know, had as much insight as Freud did. into people's psychology.
Yeah.
I have a question. There was an exhibit at the UC Art Gallery. I'm not sure if I can zero in on the time. It was drawings of German expressionist artists, and they were mostly drawings and charcoal. Were you involved in that? It must have been in the late 1970s, early 80s.
No, that I don't remember that. I was out of the museum at that point, and I don't remember that particular show. I'm sorry.
Maybe I should elaborate why I'm even asking about it, because I took my children to that, and their father was a German and had been a Nazi.
Whose father?
A great deal of my children's father, older than me. And we went through, but he was also an artist, and he was thoroughly American. We went through this art exhibit at the University Art Gallery, and they were mostly black and white drawings. And we were all just absolutely mesmerized and a little bit teary-eyed, because these artists were prophets. They were showing, and some of these were done in between 1910 and 1928.
This is very, very interesting, because these artists, they were these artists who seemed to be prophets. I mean, they were artists before World War I. Meidner, for instance, and a number of others. Franz Marc and Meidner especially, who made paintings showing the destruction that was about to take place. I mean, there is something that happens to the artistic ideas, whatever it may be. And you're absolutely right.
They're intuitive somehow.
They foresaw what was going to happen in their work. Of course, there was a lot of talk about our war coming and all that, and the Brits were fighting with the Germans and all that. But still, there was a real prophecy there. Thank you.
I'm glad I'm not the only person who thought that.
If I can follow up on my wife's question, we have both been to the Tretyakov II gallery in Moscow to see the early work of Chagall and others from the period between World War I and World War II in Russia, where many artists who were extremely creative essentially flourished early under communism and then were exiled, and their art either disappeared or reappeared in the West. Would you like to comment on that?
My comment on that was, again, very much like what was said, the prophecy. There were artists in Russia, like Malevich, and many and Tatlin, and many others, who before the October Revolution did the most revolutionary art, after Vienna, the most revolutionary art in the world, really. The most abstract, the first total abstraction. Of course, it was going on other places too, but especially in Moscow and St. Petersburg. When the communists took over, their voice, they said, "This is wonderful. We were there first." And then under Lenin, that kind of art was tolerated. Under Stalin, and that came to a total end. It was considered cosmopolitan, and Stalin moved against the abstract artists almost as much as Hitler did. But but there was this unbelievable outburst around the beginning of World War I, or even before World War I. But then.
Could you say a few things about Mark Rothko, how you found him as a person?
As a person? Mm-hmm. Well, he was pretty grumpy much of the time. don't know how many of you saw the play Red, but that was a very good play, and it gave a very good reading of the kind of a person he was. He was nice. We had a few drinks. He became very sociable. We had interesting talks, not only about his art, but he liked to talk about literature. He liked to talk about music, and he compared his art with Shakespeare and Mozart, the two, and he talked about. He was an extremely well-educated man. He had gone to Yale, and then he later on he became self-educated beyond that, and was not a particularly nice person, but you know his energy was totally devoted to his paintings. But he was also a very moral person. Like when he found out that the paintings. He was going to do a room in No, the New York, the building in New York. Anyhow,
Four Seasons?
The Philip Johnson building. When he found, and he had been paid in advance. And, the Seagrams building. Thank you. And when he found out it was going to be a dining room rather than a quiet room, he gave him the money back because he thought this was not the kind of a place for his work to be seen, and donated many of these paintings to Harvard. So he made very clear moral decisions.
Any other questions? I guess you all have books you want signed today. Well, thank you so much, gentlemen, for a very interesting conversation about life and a career-long dedication to political art in the service of humanity. I took that straight out of Paul's book.
And all based on the University of Chicago.
And I'd like to point out to everybody, those of you who live in Berkeley, March 25th is Peter Selz Day in Berkeley. I think we should all celebrate that. And happy birthday to you coming up. A toast to you, many more contributions to our understanding of art. And thank you.